Okay, welcome back, folks. We're into part 2 of topic 4. We're shifting from the concept of output to our real-world data on GDP. You're going to want to follow along with the notes, I think, to make sense of this. Let's start with the nominal GDP data shown on the page of your notes. So as discussed in the notes, the Commerce Department looks around, takes all sorts of data, and tells us that in 1960, the value of all the production of final goods in the economy is estimated to be $543.3 billion. And in 2010, they do a similar exercise, and the number they get is $14,964 billion. All right, so the first step is to turn those numbers into something you can make sense of. Express those as trillions. I'm going to pause and do that. All right, I hope that you found that 1960 is about $500 billion worth of nominal GDP and that 2010 is about $15 trillion. Of course, your next step is to compare those two numbers. And what do you get? Well, let's pause and I'm going to do that. Okay, I hope you took 15 and divided by a half, came up with the number 30, and you express that in English by saying, oh, nominal GDP in 2010 was about 30 times as big as it was in 1960. All right, so let's think for a minute. Are we going to seriously say that the economy in the year 2010 is producing 30 times as much as it did in 1960? Well, I hope you recognize that that is simply implausible. And, of course, what's happened is we're talking about some pretty serious inflation has occurred. And just like when we were talking about real versus nominal output, so too, when we talk about GDP, we have to be careful about the distinction between real and nominal. So what we need is some information about how much more stuff cost in 2010 compared to 1960 so that we can figure out how much of the apparent growth of GDP is coming about simply from rising prices and how much of it instead is coming from growing production. Well, let me give you the data we need to make sense of that. Okay, well, let's suppose that prices in the year 2010 were 6 times as high as they had been in 1960. Well, I hope that following the logic of real and nominal output that we looked at before, you're able to look at this number 30 here for the nominal GDP comparison. Say to yourself, well, if prices were 6 times as high, then really this 30 should be thought of as prices being 6 times as high, production being 5 times as high, giving us the total 30 times as much nominal GDP in the year 2010 as there was in the year 1960. And I encourage you to go back to typical test question number 1. There we saw prices triple between 2 years, and as a result, we saw nominal outputs in the latter year overstating the true value of real output by a factor of 3. Same idea here. What we're saying is that the values in 2010 are really 6 times as they should be if we want to compare them to 1960. Or you could say another way, that if you want to compare the 1960 values to the 2010 values, you want to multiply your 1960 values by the factor of 6. Now, this is the simple logic that we'll be using for typical test questions 3 and 4, this idea of simply being able to describe how much the price comparison is at work compared to how much the production comparison is at work. All right, I hope that was helpful. And again, I refer you back to the notes on the web page. See if you can follow along there. Bye for now.